Hi there! My name is Caroline and I work at the Austin Nature and Science Center. During the school year, I work at the Nature's Way Preschool. I have experience in both Waldorf and Montessori approaches, and I have a bachelor's degree in education. In this video, we're going to be talking about imaginative play and why it's important in early childhood development. We're also going to talk a little bit about how to foster it. To begin, I'd like you to think back on being 3 to 5 years old. What were some of the things that you imagined and came up with? How did you play? I know my sisters and I used to play horses. We would set up obstacle courses and run through, jumping all the jumps. Sometimes we were the horse and sometimes we were the rider. Maybe you went on imaginary expeditions. Perhaps a family pet became a character in one of your stories. Perhaps you played with a dollhouse and all of your expeditions happened in one room. Or maybe you made a treasure map. You may have had a favorite hiding place. When you think back on your own imaginative play, it may conjure up memories of a sibling that inspired you or that you looked up to. When I think of characters that truly value childlike imagination, I think about The Little Prince, Winnie the Pooh, and Peter Pan. If we can connect to the value and beauty in children's play, then we can be the sort of adults that help to foster it. I hope after watching this video, you can understand the value of this sort of play, and you're inspired to create such an environment for children. Imaginative play can also be referred to as make-believe, fantasy play, dramatic play, and pretend play. Before we get into the specifics on how to foster imaginative play, it's important to understand the early child's developmental stage. All of these developmental achievements that I'm going to be talking about are inextricably linked to imaginative play. We are what we imagine. Our very existence consists in our imagination of ourselves. Our best destiny is to imagine, at least completely, who and what and that we are. The greatest tragedy that can befall us is to go unimagined. First, in early childhood, children have mastered the concepts of identity permanence and symbolic function. Identity permanence means that the child knows that superficial changes do not change identity. So just because their teacher is wearing a costume doesn't mean that she has literally become a different person. And symbolic function is the ability to attach meaning to mental representations like letters and numbers. Pretend play is a marker of symbolic function. When they play make-believe, children tend to use an object to represent something else. Like maybe a stick becomes a phone or a snake, or a pebble is a small animal they can talk to. When they're doing this, they're using symbolic function, which is important in early literacy, mathematical development, and emotional development. The next thing the early child is developing is the ability to understand thought, also known as theory of mind. For the first time, at the beginning of early childhood, children become aware of their own thoughts. This is when they become aware of their internal world and consciousness. And they begin to think about thinking. They learn that their thoughts are private, so no one knows what they are unless they share them. They also become aware of the thoughts of others. This is an important piece in the development of empathy. With theory of mind, children learn that others can hold false beliefs. They know that the world of the mind is private, so children learn how to deceive. And they play with fantasy and reality, and for the most part, they're able to make a distinction between the two. Theory of mind, symbolic function, and identity permanence are all cornerstones in imaginative play, and vice versa. The children have learned these tools and are processing the knowledge they've learned through their play. By playing this way, the concepts the concepts become more concrete in their mind, and they develop further. For example, imaginative play helps children to vacillate between different worlds, one of reality and one of fantasy. Creating this dynamic actually helps children. Studies show that children who play make-believe more often are also more capable of distinguishing between fantasy and reality. Early childhood is also a time of identity development and self-understanding. During this period, children are developing and further creating their self-definition that will continue to evolve as they enter middle childhood. They're also trying to figure out who they are, how they are, and how the world interacts with them. As children engage in imaginative play, they're experimenting with their identity and trying on different personalities. In early childhood, children begin forming their first long-lasting memories. Most people have their first memory between the ages of 2.5 and 3. Several studies have shown that imaginary play helps children to develop better overall memory retention. Children also use imaginative play to process and therefore remember the things they've learned. For example, we have themed weeks at the Nature Center. During the Weather Week, we had children pretending they could control the weather. And here's an example of a child pretending to be a tree snake after learning about them.
I'm a tree snake.
In early childhood, children gain improved attention and process information more quickly. Between ages 3 and 6, they rapidly develop the part of their brain that controls planning and goal setting, the most development happening at age 4, and by age 6, the child has developed 95% of their peak brain weight. So this is a very important time for children to pursue planning their own ideas and goals, which happens in imaginative play. Studies have shown that imaginative play results in better concentration, more self-control, and ability to wait for longer periods of time, and a greater understanding of delayed gratification. Between the ages of 3 and 6, children rapidly develop language. At age 3, children typically know between 900 and 1,000 words. By age 6, children use 2,600 words and know 20,000. Studies show that there's an inherent link between imaginative play and language development. When children are playing imaginatively, they're playing with language, meaning children can practice and experiment the art of conversation and the power of language. They experiment with present tense and past tense, sometimes rewriting the past and changing a situation. They experiment with mental representations and qualifying sentences like, "Pretend this is a train." Did you know imaginative play is sometimes used as a tool for assessment and intervention with language-delayed children? Even when children are playing alone imaginatively, they're likely to be talking to themselves. There's evidence that imaginative play helps children have a better adjustment to school, better reading readiness. They have better language usage and more signs of a divergent and creative thought. Studies have also shown that fantasy play results in verbal intelligence and improved conversation skills. Children in this age group are learning how to regulate their emotions and learning how to understand conflicting emotions, as well as emotions they have towards themselves, like guilt, shame, and pride. When children are acting out something with characters or just in general a narrative they're acting out, oftentimes they're externalizing and projecting an emotional process. And this helps them to work through their emotions and come to conclusions. Imaginative play helps develop emotional regulation and emotional intelligence. Play provides children a way to externalize something that directly addresses their sources of fear and dread in their lives, and it can offer new hope. Pretend play has self-healing properties, which is why play therapy is used so often for children. Studies show that children that engage in imaginative play are more likely to regulate their own emotions and are better able to cope with difficult situations later in life. For example, now children may be processing the pandemic, and some aspects and themes from our current crisis are probably present in their play. Children also use play to process big life events. There was once a child at our school that was processing the birth of a sibling. Every day she came to school, she would put a ball under her shirt, and then she would find somebody to play the role of doctor. She then proceeded to give birth. After the baby was born, she cared for it, and then started the process all over again. This is an example of a child processing a life change, and they're grappling with understanding it. The repetitive nature of make-believe play is very common. The more the children act out a scenario, the more they're processing and making sense of both their internal and external world. The following is an example from an excellent book called The House of Make-Believe. In this situation, the child is processing the divorce of his parents. In play therapy, Mark acted out many of his conflicts through games of superhero. At these times, he was in control of everyone around him, bullying, commanding, and always winning whatever battle he staged. One particular incident, early in his therapy, demonstrated his acute reaction to their divorce. Hurricane Gilbert had recently struck the South and was often shown on television. Mark pretended that Hurricane Gilbert was approaching the large dollhouse in the playroom. He knocked down furniture and toy people and threw objects out the windows. He then took his doctor kit, made believe it was a repair box, and put everything to rights. He played this game over and over in several sessions. Each time, rampant destruction of the house was followed by repair. One cannot avoid the belief that this cycle represented Mark's attempt to try and bring his parents together through this repetitive play. This effort seemed to reflect a self-healing process, as he began to accept the divorce, and as the therapy began to help him understand that he could still have both his parents' love, albeit in two separate houses. Mark gradually stopped playing at the destruction of the house. He began more and more to use the miniature dolls in a more tender manner, with games involving caretaking, nurturance, and having fun together. Emotional intelligence and regulation is one of the most common predictors of success in adulthood, making this skill especially important. It also serves as another example of why it's so important for play to be directed by children. When interrupting children's play, you may be interrupting important emotional processing. Additionally, when children practice manipulating and controlling a miniaturized world, they're able to project their own internal emotional world. They also possess a greater ability to identify when a negative event in their own lives is caused externally, and they're less likely to attribute the negative event to themselves. This process helps in creating self-understanding and self-compassion, as well as less depression later in life. Now that we know how important imaginative play is to the early child, we can talk about ways to foster it. First of all, children need time and space to play this way. If you think about some of the spaces you played in as a child, you may remember that some of them may have been in nature, or others felt like this small, hidden away space. I know in my house there was a specific cabinet my siblings and I enjoyed playing in. We would hide in it and tell stories with books and flashlights. Creating small secret spaces can be really helpful in fostering imaginative play. If you're an educator or a parent, Having a secret place the children can hide to play in may make you feel nervous, but there are some specific designs that make this feeling possible for the children while still allowing you to monitor them. One of those designs is using silks or somewhat see-through fabrics. In this picture, I've used some sticks, a silk, and some clothespins to create a sort of haven for children, but I can still see through the walls. Another way you can do this is just make sure the walls are short, so you can still look over and see what's happening. Along with time and space, props also help children to engage in imaginative play. Props can be very simple, loose parts that require the children to think about how they're going to use them. I go into greater detail about loose parts in a previous video, and if you'd like more information, please go ahead and check that video out. Loose parts are things like sticks, branches, rocks, blocks, sand, and fabrics. They're open-ended and mobile. Another prop in a child's story could be a pet, like a dog or a cat, or even a book, a piece of paper for a map, a stick, a stuffed animal, a bag, a fabric they turn into a cape or a magic carpet. Another excellent prop is puppets. Children can use puppets to tell a story, which is invaluable. Another thing you can do to encourage imaginative play is read books. Books provide imagery and promote an understanding of narrative. Some books can also provide examples of imaginative play that can inspire children as they create their fantasy. Along with reading books, it's also really important to tell your child stories. Children are totally captivated by oral stories because there's a general need for human narrative. You could take a book and tell the story without even getting the book out. The benefit of this is that you're modeling how to tell a story to the child. Children at this developmental stage may not be able to read yet, but they can tell stories. You're modeling something that they're actually capable of achieving. And storytelling is an important part of early literacy and language development. As you tell them stories, they're developing comprehension skills. It's important for children to practice telling stories, and as they're playing make-believe, they're doing just that. And in this way, you're supporting their development. The story could be fantasy. It could be a true story of an event, or something that even happened to you. It could be a fable, a myth, or a legend from another culture or your culture. You could also tell a story that relates to something that they're going through. This is an excellent book by Susan Perot. It goes through different challenges children may be having in their lives and presents stories that relate to those challenges. She also has a book called Healing Stories for Challenging Behavior. It has a similar format. You don't have to explain that it relates to the child's emotional world or their behavior. Chances are the child will pick up on that themselves and process it internally, externally through play, and maybe even by talking to you about it. It's actually really beneficial to tell the same story over and over again. Each time you tell the story, the format becomes more and more clear to the child. They're processing other parts of the story each time. The more you tell it, the more they're able to retell it. And it's very empowering for children to remember and tell stories. There's inherent power in being the storyteller and holding the narrative and attention of others. And in this way, storytelling can promote self-confidence and self-esteem. I hope you have a greater understanding of imaginative play and how necessary it is in early childhood. I hope that I've been able to give you some practical ways of supporting fantasy play. And I hope that you join us in the future as we give a tour of our Nature's Way preschool.